What makes it a true solution?
Good place to start. Okay, so a true solution is fundamentally a homogeneous mixture.
Homogeneous meaning uniform.
Exactly, uniform throughout. Think of, say, salt dissolving in water. You can't see the salt particles anymore, right? It's all one phase.
Okay.
And crucially, it's a physical change, not chemical. The salt is still salt, the water is still water.
Right, you haven't made something new.
Precisely. And you can't just, filter the salt back out easily once it's dissolved. It's truly mixed at the molecular level.
That homogeneity is key then. And it's not just about what you mix, but how much, right? Does that affect the solution?
Oh, definitely. The properties, think density, boiling point, even vapor pressure, they aren't fixed. They depend heavily on the relative amounts of the solute.
The thing being dissolved.
And the solvent, the thing doing the dissolving, we call this the concentration.
Gotcha. Concentration.
And yeah, external things like temperature and pressure, they can play a big role too, changing those properties. Though pressure's effect on solid solutions is usually tiny.
And we usually think liquids, but solutions can be gases, solids, all sorts, can't they?
Absolutely. Big misconception that it's just liquids, the air we breathe, that's a gaseous solution. Nitrogen, oxygen, other gases, all mixed uniformly.
Right.
Or alloys like brass, that's copper dissolved in zinc, a solid solution.
Wow. Okay.
So principles apply across the board: gases, liquids, solids. And a key point, gases mixing together. They always form true solutions.
Always interesting. Okay, so concentration is key.
Right.
Why so many different ways to measure it? Mass percent, volume percent, molarity, molality. It seems complicated.
Well, they each have their uses, And importantly, some change with temperature, others don't. That's often the deciding factor.
Temperature dependence. Okay.
So like mass percentage weight of solute per 100 grams of solution, that doesn't change with temperature. Mass is mass, hot or cold. So if you have 10% salt solution by mass, it's always 10 grams salt and 100 grams total.
Makes sense. Stable.
But things involving volume, like mass by volume percentage mass of solute in 100 milliliters of solution or volume percentage for liquids, those do change with temperature.
Because liquids expand and contract.
Exactly. Volume changes, so the concentration value changes too. Not ideal if you need high precision across different temperatures.
Okay. What else?
Then you've got ppm, parts per million, great for really tiny amounts like pollutants in water.
Very dilute, yeah.
And strength of solution, grams per liter. Then we get into moles, which chemists love. Molarity moles per liter of solution. Again, volume-based.
Oh, temperature dependent.
Right.
Decreases if it gets hotter.
Right. But then there's molality. This is the gold standard for temperature independence. It's moles of solute per kilogram of solvent.
Kilogram of solvent, not solution.
Key difference. Mass doesn't change with temperature, so molality stays constant. Very useful.
Okay, I see why that's preferred sometimes.
And mole fraction 2, ratio of moles of one thing to total moles, that's also temperature independent. No units, just a ratio.
Yeah.
It's all about picking the right measurement for what you need to do.
Right, tool for the job. Okay, so that's concentration. Let's shift to solubility. What makes something dissolve in the first place and how much?
Solubility is basically the max amount of solute you can dissolve in a set amount of solvent at a given temperature.
The saturation point.
Exactly. Before that, it's unsaturated, you can dissolve more. At that point, it's saturated. There's actually a dynamic equilibrium happening.
Dissolving and crystallizing at the same rate.
Precisely. And then you have the weird ones. Supersaturated solutions. They hold more solute than they should. Very unstable.
Like a Jenga tower ready to fall.
Good analogy. A tiny disturbance, like adding a seed crystal, and bam, all the extra solute crashes out.
So what factors control this? I always hear like dissolves, like...
That's fundamental. Polar things dissolve in polar solvents, like salt, ionic, very polar, in water. Non-polar things dissolve in non-polar solvents like oil and gasoline.
Makes sense.
Ionic solids specifically dissolve better in solvents with a high dielectric constant, like water. Water's good at shielding the ions from each other.
What about temperature? Does heating always help things dissolve?
Not always. It depends. If the dissolving process absorbs heat, if it's endothermic, then yes, higher temperature usually means higher solubility. Think sugar in hot tea.
Right.
But if dissolving releases heat exothermic, then higher temperature actually decreases solubility. Some salts do that.
Interesting. And pressure.
For solids and liquids dissolving, pressure has almost no effect. They're basically incompressible.
But for gases dissolving in liquids, pressure is huge, right?
Yeah.
This brings us to Henry's law.
Yes. This is where pressure becomes critical. Henry's law basically says the amount of gas that dissolves in a liquid is directly proportional to the pressure of that gas above the liquid.
More pressure, more gas dissolves. Simple enough.
Pretty much. The equation is often written as mass dissolved. M equals a constant KH times pressure, P, or partial pressure, P, equals the constant KH times the mole fraction X of the gas in the solution.
Okay, KH. The Henry's law constant. What's the key thing about that?
The crucial nugget is the higher the KH value for a gas in a specific liquid, the lower its solubility.
Wait, higher constant, lower solubility.
Yes. Seems backward, but think of it like this. A high KH means you need a lot of pressure to get even a small amount dissolved, or a small mole fraction results in a high partial pressure. So gases like helium or nitrogen have high KH values in water. They're not very soluble.
Okay, got it. High KH, low solubility. So where do we see Henry's law in action? You mentioned applications.
Oh, everywhere. Think about a can of soda.
The fizz.
Exactly. They seal it under high CO2 pressure. That forces lots of CO2 to dissolve in the liquid, according to Henry's law. Pop the top, pressure releases.
And then the CO2 comes bubbling out because the solubility drops.
Perfect. Or think about deep-sea divers. They breathe special air mixtures, often with helium replacing some nitrogen.
Why helium?
Because at the high pressures deep underwater, a lot of gas dissolves in the blood. Nitrogen is more soluble than helium, lower KH for N2 than He. If a diver comes up too fast, the pressure drops, and that dissolved nitrogen can form bubbles in their bloodstream.
The bends. Ouch.
Very dangerous. Helium is much less soluble, so there's less risk of it bubbling out dangerously. Same idea applies at high altitude.
Less pressure up there.
Right. Lower atmospheric pressure means less oxygen dissolves in your blood via your lungs. That can lead to anoxia, oxygen sickness. That's why climbers often need supplemental oxygen.
Fascinating how these principles play out. Okay, from dissolved to gases, let's talk vapor pressure of liquid solutions. What is it, and how does adding stuff change it?
Vapor pressure is just the pressure exerted by the vapor above a liquid when the liquid and vapor are in equilibrium.
So how easily it evaporates, basically.
Kind of, yeah. It increases with temperature. Hotter molecules escape more easily. Volatile liquids like ether have high vapor pressure, low boiling points. Less volatile ones like water have lower vapor pressure, higher boiling point.
Okay, now add a solute, specifically a non-volatile one like sugar in water.
Right. This brings us to Raoult's law. When you add a non-volatile solute, it actually lowers the vapor pressure of the solvent.
Lowers it. What?
Imagine the surface of the liquid. The solute molecules take up some space, blocking some solvent molecules from escaping into the vapor phase. Fewer molecules escaping means lower pressure.
Makes intuitive sense.
And Raoult's law quantifies it.
Yeah.
The relative lowering of vapor pressure, that's P degrees, where P degrees is pure solvent VP and P is solution VP, is equal to the mole fraction of the solute.
Okay. What if the solute is also volatile, like mixing alcohol and water?
Good question. Raoult's law still works, but for each component. The partial vapor pressure of each liquid in the mixture is proportional to its mole fraction in the liquid solution. So PA, PA_XA, PB agrees XB.
PA, PB are the partial pressures. PA and PB are the pure vapor pressures, and XA, XB are the mole fractions.
Exactly. And the total vapor pressure above the solution is just the sum. PT equals PA plus PB.
But Raoult's law isn't perfect, is it? It has limits.
Definitely. It really only works perfectly for ideal solutions, which are quite rare. It assumes the solute doesn't interact weirdly, doesn't associate or dissociate, and it works best for very dilute solutions.
Okay, so let's talk ideal versus non-ideal. What makes a solution ideal?
An ideal solution is one that obeys Raoult's law perfectly across all concentrations. And crucially, when you mix the components, there's zero heat change and zero volume change. V mix equals 0.
No heat, no shrink or swell. Why?
It means the intermolecular forces, the attractions between molecules, are basically the same between unlike molecules AB as they are between like molecules A and BB. Think benzene and toluene. They're so similar, they mix almost ideally.
Okay, but most solutions aren't ideal.
Most aren't, no. They show deviations from Raoult's law. And you do get heat and volume changes on mixing.
So deviations, what kinds?
Two main types. Positive deviation happens when the AB attractions are weaker than the AA and BD attractions. The molecules kind of want to escape each other more easily into the vapor phase.
So higher vapor pressure than Raoult's law predicts.
Exactly. And mixing is usually endothermic. It absorbs heat, feels cool, and the volume often increases slightly. Think ethanol and acetone.
Okay, and the opposite?
Negative deviation. Here, the AB attractions are stronger than A and BB. The molecules stick together more tightly in the liquid phase.
Lower vapor pressure than predicted.
Right. Mixing as exothermic gives off heat and the volume often contracts. Chloroform and acetone are a classic example. They form hydrogen bonds.
And these non-ideal solutions can form azeotropes.
Yes.
Strange mixtures.
Yes. Azeotropes are fascinating. They're mixtures that boil at a constant temperature, and the vapor has the same composition as the liquid. You can't separate them by simple distillation.
Can't separate them. Why not?
Because they boil as if they were a single pure substance at that specific composition. Solutions with positive deviation can form minimum boiling point azeotropes, like rectified spirit 95.5% ethanol, 4.5% water. It boils lower than either pure ethanol or pure water.
Ah, I've heard of that.
And solutions with negative deviation can form maximum boiling point azeotropes, like a specific mix of nitric acid and water that boils higher than either pure component.
Constant boiling mixtures. Wild. Okay, this leads perfectly into colligative properties. You mentioned vapor pressure lowering was one. What defines these properties?
The defining feature is that they depend only on the number of solute particles dissolved in the solvent, not on the identity or nature of those particles. Only the quantity matters, assuming a dilute solution.
Just the number count. Okay, what are they?
We've got four main ones. 1, relative lowering of vapor pressure. We just covered that. Adding solute lowers VP.
Correct.
2, elevation in boiling point, ATB. Solutions boil at a higher temperature than the pure solvent. The elevation is proportional to the molality M of the solution. ATB equal KBM.
TB it is.
The molal elevation constant or abeliostopic constant, specific to the solvent.
Okay, higher boiling point. Makes sense if the vapor pressure is lower.
Exactly. 3, depression of freezing point, ATF. Solutions freeze at a lower temperature than the pure solvent. Same idea, ATF-KFN.
KTF is the molal depression constant or cryoscopic constant.
Correct. This is why we salt roads in winter. The salty water freezes at a much lower temperature than pure water.
Antifreeze in cars too.
Yep. And the 4th one is osmosis.
Water moving across membranes.
Right. The spontaneous movement of solvent molecules through a semi-permeable membrane, one that lets solvent pass but blocks solute from a region of pure solvent to a solution, or from a dilute solution to a more concentrated one.
Trying to equalize concentration.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
It's driven by differences in solvent activity, which relates to concentration, and the pressure you need to apply to stop this flow. That's osmotic pressure.
Osmotic pressure. And that's quantifiable.
Oh, yes. Van Hoff showed that for dilute solutions, it behaves like an ideal gas, V equals nRT. Same form as the ideal gas law. It can be surprisingly large.
And you can reverse it. Reverse osmosis.
You can. If you apply a pressure greater than the osmotic pressure to the solution side, you can force solvent molecules back through the membrane, leaving the silt behind.
That's how desalination works, getting fresh water from seawater.
That's a major application, yes. Pushing pure water out of the salty solution.
And biologically, this matters hugely, right? Isotonic, hypotonic.
Absolutely critical. Solutions with the same osmotic pressure are isotonic. Like our blood and 50.9% saline solution, that's why IB drips use it, no net water movement in or out of blood cells.
What if the pressures are different?
If the surrounding solution has lower osmotic pressure, hypotonic, water flows into cells. Red blood cells can swell and burst, that's hemolysis. If the solution has higher osmotic pressure, hypertonic, water flows out of cells, causing them to shrivel, that's plasmolysis. Think of slugs shriveling when you put salt on them.
Grim example, but clear. Okay, so colligative properties depend on the number of particles. What if the solute messes with that number? Like salt splitting into ions.
Yes. That leads to what we call abnormal molar mass. If you use a colligative property measurement to calculate the molar mass of your solute, you might get a weird answer because the calculation assumes 1 mole of solute gives 1 mole of particles in solution. But if the solute dissociates like NaCl breaking into Na+ and Cl ions, you get more particles than you assumed.
So the effect, like freezing point depression, is bigger than expected.
Exactly. A bigger effect leads you to calculate a lower molar mass than the true value. Conversely, if solute molecules associate stick together, like 2 acetic acid molecules forming a dimer in benzene, you get fewer particles than assumed.
Smaller effect. Calculated molar mass is higher than reality.
Precisely.
So how do chemists correct for this? There must be a way.
There is. It's called the Van Hoff factor, usually written as I.
The letter I. What is it?
It's basically a correction factor. It's the ratio of the observed colligative property value to the value you'd calculate assuming no dissociation or association.
Okay, so what do typical I values look like?
If I is greater than 1, it means dissociation is happening. For NaCl, which breaks into 2 ions, I is ideally 2. For K2SO4, which forms 3 ions, 2K plus and 1 SO4 2, I is ideally 3.
And if I is less than 1?
That indicates association. Molecules are clumping together, reducing the particle count.
I equals 1.
That means it's a non-electrolyte. It dissolves without changing the number of particles like sugar or urea in water. It behaves ideally in terms of particle count. You can even use IA to calculate the degree of dissociation or association. It's a really useful concept.
Wow, okay. So pulling this all together, understanding solutions, concentration, solubility, Raoult's law, colligative properties, this Van Hoff factor. It's incredibly detailed.
It is, but it means we can predict and control how mixtures behave. From designing industrial processes, making medicines, understanding biology.
To just making better coffee or antifreeze that works.